So today we want to talk about psychology, the impact of that within business. Matt is actually going to talk about the different parts of the brain that actually influence this psychology and how that can be applied in different business senses. And then also how we're going to get into different psychological phenomenons as examples for how different companies influence people's brains to maybe buy a product or get them to do something and how they leverage that. So Matt, if you want to start by kicking us off and telling us the different parts of the brain, how that works, and the influence of psychology in all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very critical and important for executives, business people, anybody in life really to understand psychology and how the mind works, how narrative transport happens, how influence happens, persuasion, all of it. Because you are consistently being influenced all the time. You don't even know it. We're constantly influencing all the time, whether you realize it or not. Companies and the media are always using strategies against you. Commercial transactions are always using strategies to influence you. And you need to understand how they are doing so, what levers they're pulling, what triggers, and what buttons they're pushing, and how you could do the same with your own products, with your own business, with your own narratives, with your own stories. And that is why it's very crucial for us to understand how the mind works, how psychology works in human behavior. So, to get us kicked off, I think the best place to start is with the brain itself. So, the brain is obviously incredible. It's an incredible organ. It's very ancient. But when it comes to psychology and persuasion, there's really three key centers of the brain that are most crucial. So whenever we pitch or we sell something, pitch an idea, sell a concept, sell a physical product, tell a story, we tend to go about it from a certain part of the brain called the neocortex. But the reality is, anytime that you pitch or you persuade, or anytime that you try to tell a story, there's a certain part of your brain that you start from, that you begin to tell your narrative from. But you actually do it backwards versus the way that people actually receive information. So there's three key centers of the brain. The first one is the most ancient part of the brain, which is called the reptilian or the crocodile brain. The second one is the limbic system, where the amygdala lies, and that's called the midbrain. The third part of the brain is the neocortex. So the reptilian brain has a very simple function. It operates on the three F's. When it assesses information, it wants to find out whether it should fight, whether it should take flight, or whether it should fuck something. Those are the three key drivers for the reptilian brain itself. It's the first place that we process information, any information in the environment. The second part of the brain, the midbrain, the limbic system, is also very ancient, but the limbic system is focused on social meaning, particularly, assigning social value to information that it receives. The third part of the brain, the neocortex, is very analytical and rational and logical. It's focused on the key details, the nuances, math, everything in that realm. So when we pitch, because we know our story so well, because we know our product so well, and we're so in the details and in the nuances, we start off by spieling all the little details and analytics of our story or our product. But you're not ready to receive that when I do that. You are starting off from the croc brain. You need to figure out if this is relevant, if you need to listen to it, why should I listen to it? And then you need to understand for yourself why there is any social relevance, who else is using this. And then you'll be prepared to receive the details. So a great way to illustrate this would be an example of a car crash. And before I even start there, this whole concept that we're talking about was popularized by as I referenced my last boss, an old mentor, Oren Clough, in his book Pitch Anything. I'll start off there. But this example was one that he popularized as well. An example of a car crash. So if there's a car crash in a parking lot that you're in, the first thing that you'll do is you'll snap to attention and you'll immediately figure out where it is, what happened, and is put on you in the environment. Where was the car crash at? The second thing that you'll do is that you'll look and see who was involved in the car crash. For this example, it would be a lady crashing into a guy that's trying to pull out of a parking spot. The third way that you'll process this is you'll start to assign a story and a narrative to it, fill in the details, fill in the gaps, and figure out exactly what happened, why it happened in the car crash itself. So this is very important to know because we pitch backwards, we influence backwards. We start from a place that is the end point and the end center that people receive information from. So you need to start by influencing and getting past the croc brain and the limbic system to start, the reptilian brain. To get past the croc brain itself, you need to avoid triggering its fear centers. How do you do so? Well, you have to be quick, you have to be fast, you have to be novel, and you have to use narrative, and you have to be simple. Use clarity and precise and concise language when you're influencing the croc brain. Then you use a social connection to get people, which we'll talk about when it comes to biases themselves and heuristics. You use a social connection to get people feeling that there's a FOMO or social validity, somebody that they know is using it. And then you can jump into the details. We're not talking about the details and the neocortex on this episode itself. We'll get into that on another point. But a great example that I could give, because we do this all the time. We're constantly at trade shows and conventions talking with CEOs, chief information officers, chief supply chain officers who are running from session to session. They're usually speaking at events that we're at, or even investors themselves. So assuming that the people who are listening have something to sell or have an idea or have a product, if you were to get time with these people and do a quick elevator pitch with them, there's a very specific method that we use that works very well. And it utilizes this methodology where you talk to the croc brain first, then you talk to the limbic system, and then you talk to the neocortex. So if I was at a conference, which I'll be at in 2 days' time from now in Las Vegas, and you were an investor, the way that I'd go about it when I grab you would be like, hey, Ashton, I'm Matthew Beauvais. We both know Nikki, actually. So I was just with him the other day for lunch. He mentioned you. He said that we should get some time together, talk a little bit about what I'm working on because he thinks that there might be some overlap. I have to run to another session, so we got to keep this super quick. I really only got 2 minutes here, but I wanted to make sure that we grabbed each other before I went to that next session. If this is irrelevant and doesn't make sense, just feel free to say no. No worries at all. Would that be unreasonable?
No, let's hear it.
And then you can go into your pitch, which we'll get into once again in the next episode on how to actually structure a pitch itself and how that should look. But you have to set the stage perfectly. You have to set people up so that they're able to receive the message. That's almost as, if not more important than the message that you're delivering itself when you influence people. You must get past the croc brain and the reptilian brain. You must get past the limbic system and make sure that they're comfortable. And that will buy you time and attention for the actual pitch itself that you're giving to the neocortex and the analytical part of the brain. You must set it up correctly by allaying any fear that those two centers may have in regards to your message. The next most important part of human behavior, psychology, and influence would be heuristics and psychological biases themselves. We're constantly taking mental shortcuts so that we have to expend as little energy as possible in dealing with messaging and consuming information. We're trying to make it as easy on the mind as possible. That's why we use heuristics and biases in psychology. So the two most important ones that we believe are the key drivers of human nature are scarcity/loss aversion and social proof, which is also known as fear of missing out, keeping up with the Joneses, or mimetic desire. Now, the two books that I think well, actually, three books that are most critical for heuristics and biases themselves, aside from Pitch Anything, would be Laws of Human Nature by Robert Greene, Wanting by Luke Burgess, and then Influence by Dr. Robert Cialdini. They both talk about all of these concepts that we're getting into. When it comes to scarcity and loss aversion, how would you describe that to people? What would be your take on that? How do you understand scarcity?
Yeah, so like you said, scarcity is the lower part of the brain, the croc brain, meaning a lot of the things behind it are subconscious. A lot of the drivers, I guess you could say, are subconscious. And really what it is people tend to want what they can't have. And you see this a lot in parenting, where parents will get their kids to do something by threatening to take that thing away from them. And that's a really simple example. And before we actually get into an example of how maybe a company or a brand would use that, I want to talk about people in general and how they think they can't be really influenced by this, even though it's such a core to our survival that it exists in the croc brain. It's compulsory. And people tend to overrate their cognitive abilities. I saw a study, I don't remember where it was from, but 65% of Americans think they have above average intelligence,
Mm.
which is pretty funny. But this thing applies to everybody. And at a certain level, if it's advanced enough, people are tricked into thinking they're making the decision for themselves, when in reality, they're being influenced by a psychological tactic, in this case, scarcity, by a company or a brand. Because after all, it would be pretty scary if we understood that we couldn't trust our own judgment, we couldn't trust our own influence on our actions, right? So, how do companies actually do this? Well, it's like the parent-child example, but at a more sophisticated level. So, first, they'll use a tactic of limiting the supply of something that they're offering. So, when people have an abundance of choice, they tend to spend less. That's directly correlated. And that's because when you have a lot of options, you subconsciously think in your croc brain that you have abundance, right? But when you have limited options, it makes you think that you don't have a lot of options, you don't have a lot of choice, and you have to act. Otherwise, your hunter gatherer self is going to be like, okay, well, if I don't act now, I'm going to lose everything, right? Then what they do, so actually, let me give an example first. Think of a car showroom, right? There's a couple cars here as opposed to a dealership. There's a couple cars and it's limited options like a Tesla showroom. You are more likely to spend at a showroom because if you want a Tesla, there's a couple different Teslas in there. If you were to go to a dealership where there's hundreds of Teslas, you'd be like, oh, well, yeah, let me meander around, whatever. But at a showroom, there's a guy there, telling you this is what we got. You have that pressure from the salesman, yada, yada, yada. You're more likely to buy at a showroom. The second thing they do is they make it hard to acquire. So it could be a limited time offer. It could be you have to jump through hoops to get it. It could be a high price item that's scarce. Hunter gatherer brain makes you want to go after it because it's harder to get. And then the kicker is they add on artificial scarcity. Yeah. So what that could be is suddenly, say in a real estate deal, there's a second buyer, right? Or you looked at the price last week and then the price went up like they do in airlines. When you look at tickets, they'll track your IP and then raise the prices. So it makes you more inclined to buy because you think the ticket is getting more expensive. And not only is the item rare now, but it seems like it's slipping away from you. And that's loss aversion. People are more likely to avoid loss. It's a phenomenon where people are twice as likely to avoid loss than to desire a gain. And this is like the glass half empty approach. People are hardwired to see a glass half empty rather than half full. So that's how they kind of leverage scarcity to get you to buy something or to, get you to do a certain thing while making you think you're making the decision.
Scarcity is very interesting because it's constantly manufactured companies by brands all the time. Items that are showcased in abundance are much less attractive than items that are showcased as being in a limited quantity. The second important bias that we're focusing on is social proof and mimetic desire. Now, once again, social proof can also be referenced as fear of missing out or keeping up with the Joneses, looking at the lawn across the street. How much greener is it compared to yours? How much manicured is it compared to yours? This is something that we do consistently, and this is a bias that's directly correlated with the limbic system and the amygdala. So nothing draws a crowd like a crowd. There are restaurants that will hire people to have a line around a building for weeks after a grand opening in order to draw more attention and more people to that restaurant itself. Another way that this is manufactured is through Google reviews or Amazon reviews. It's easy to buy reviews through bots, through AI. Companies are trying to get better at filtering it, but the more attention and more reviews from a quantity basis and from a quality basis that we see on a restaurant or that we see for a product on Amazon, or that we see for a meme or a reel on IG or YouTube when it comes to likes and views, means the more likely we are to engage with it. We're constantly looking around the environment and what others around us are doing to assess if it's relevant to us. So social proof is leveraged consistently all the time. Social media puts this in your face all the time. You can see it consistently. But we're always using other people as a barometer for ourselves, as a yardstick for ourselves to measure ourselves up against. Mimetic desire is interesting because not only do we tend to want what people have, mimetic desire is a principle that we tend to desire what other people want. We don't necessarily know what it is that we should want besides our creature comforts, besides our basic needs, right? Food, shelter, water, clothes. Anything outside of that, when it comes to material desires or experiences, we tend to look at other people, which are called models in this theory, as being the basis of what it is that we should want. How do we know what it is that we should want? What kind of goals should we have? What kind of money should we be making salary-wise on an annual basis? What kind of car should we be driving? What kind of house should we have? Mimetic desire goes even deeper than just what, focusing on what other people have, but also what it is that we want. So you have to constantly assess what it is that you're desiring, what it is that you want to have. And is that desire true and inherent for yourself? And if not, where is it coming from? Who is it that you're modeling? Who are your models that are showcasing to you what it is that you want to have? You need to take constant inventory of your desires and your wants and what your perceived needs are consistently. 4 lines that I think encapsulate all of this that you should write down, keep in your notes, keep in front of you, put on your phone, so that you're constantly taking inventory of your messaging and how you're being influenced consistently, or that people want what they can't have. People chase that which moves away from them. People tend to want what others have, and we only place value on things that are difficult to obtain. Now, once again, the 4 books that we would recommend for you to dive deeper into all of this would be Pitch Anything by Oren Clough, Influence by Dr. Robert Cialdini, Laws of Human Nature by Robert Greene, and then Wanting, which is about mimetic desire, from Luke Burgess.
Cool. So I think that kind of puts a bow on everything that we talked about. We still do in the next episode want to talk about pitching and the psychology behind that, how to actually pitch, what kinds of things to leverage, especially in the croc brain. But also we want to get into some things in the limbic brain in the next episode as well. So thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed.
Thank you, guys.